This is just a small story about the meeting of two friends. I began to wonder, what does a man go through a year after the painful collapse of a loving marriage? Does he move on? Does he start over? Does the pain ever go away? I suspect the answer depends on the person. This brief day in life is an exploration of this question for one person in one situation, trying to become whole again and failing. It was a pleasant evening, and I smiled and laughed. It seemed for the first time in a year. Old friends did that for me. And for just one fleeting evening, it felt like the events of the past year hadn't happened. Old friends leave a mark on our hearts that remains even when they're gone. And when you see them again, even after a long absence, they become the same part that fits perfectly into that space. It feels like they never left. In fact, they never did leave. I left once. I packed my bags, took a few things that were most important to me, and left. You'd have to know me, live with me for a long time, to fully understand what that statement means. I'm a person who forms attachments. When I buy a car, I keep it until it drives its last mile. It suits me, and it feels right. I don't just buy a house, I live in it. I'm attached to it. The walls become my fortress, and the land around them sustains me. My work becomes my calling. I wake up in the morning with excitement and go to bed at night satisfied with a day well spent. My friends mean everything to me, and my family comes first. And yet, I find myself 1,000 miles away from the place I called home just a year ago. I left home, quit my job, and most importantly, left my wife. I didn't vanish. I just decided to leave without warning and didn't tell anyone. I didn't hide, and over time, I responded to their emails and text messages, eventually answering phone calls and talking to those I left behind. I resisted their pleas to return and cut ties with my old life, starting a new one. Today, in just this one day, it all fell away. Jim McDonald has always been my friend. We grew up together, went to school together, married sisters, and lived just a mile apart. He was in town for just one night, moving from New York to Boston for work. Late last night, he arrived in town and booked a room at the Highway Motel. Jim was so thoughtful. This morning, he was at my front door at 7:30 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee and that mischievous grin I knew too well. I opened the door. "Well, are we having breakfast, or are you going to stand there?" Jim knew how to handle words. I have one of those apartments that some well-off people build above their garage when they want someone to look after the place while they travel to expensive and exotic locations. I know it sounds bitter. The truth is, the Smiths, that's actually their name, are good people who've earned what they have and are generous to others. I was looking for something small and simple. My needs were minimal. There were no loud apartment neighbors here shouting and throwing crazy parties day and night. So, Jim could comfortably settle in the living room while I took a shower, and we invited each other. "So, how's it going here? Is this all you hoped for, wise guy?" I muttered to myself. "Yes, alcohol is cheap, and women are easy." I heard him cough through the wall. "1 point for me. This image will stay with me." The day was coming to an end. "I guess by now you've figured out Jim and I aren't very fancy. We don't need a fancy kitchen, so I took us to our favorite diner in a small town. The crowd was nicer here, the food was better, and the coffee was darker." "So, what have you been up to all this time? How's the new job? Making friends?" "Who are you, my mom?" "Yeah, the job's good. I made a few friends, or at least I have people who don't make me run the other way when I see them looking for some entertainment." "No, Mom, but I'm keeping my nose clean." "I told you to stop doing that. It's disgusting." I just smiled and shook my head, looking at my plate. This man, my friend, worked with some top-notch engineers and businessmen, but you'd never guess if you listened to him. He could turn himself on and off like a chameleon, blending into his surroundings. Well, I have 12, maybe 14 hours before I need to head back. Get some sleep tonight and hit the road when the sun comes up. What are you going to do to entertain me? Well, downtown there are a bunch of bars. I know where they are, but I've never been there. He shook his head. No, Claire is very strict about that. You said that. I love your wife, but I don't need to hear that. He chuckled, picking at his plate of brewery hash eggs. This guy, this daring one, loved his wife as much as I once loved mine. I've got news for you. If it's what I think, I don't need to hear it. No, not that. Claire's pregnant. Well, that's all I needed to hear. I yelled and jumped to my feet, pulling him out of his chair and enveloping him in a bear hug. When were you planning on telling me? He laughed like a fool, drawing the attention of everyone in the diner. Parents with children weren't thrilled with my outburst. I scanned the room and loudly declared, Can you believe it? Now they let just about anyone become a father. It elicited smiles and applause as we sat back down. Really, Henry, sometimes your inappropriate behavior embarrasses me. He had to cough to stifle a laugh. What kind of example are you going to set for your godson? What godson? Really? Jim just cocked his head to the side and raised his fork the way people do, as if to say, of course, who else? That smirk again. Claire insists. I tried talking her out of it, but you know how she can be when she's made up her mind. There was no doubt about it. This day was shaping up to be the best day in a year. Jim and I grew up by the water. As kids, we fished off the docks and roamed the boatyards. When we were old enough, our fathers bought us an old snipe sailboat that needed a lot of work. The four of us spent that winter rebuilding and repairing the hull, fixing the sails, and replacing the rigging. We managed to build the boat before we even learned how to sail it. We studied our knots, learned the language, and read books on sailing, to the dismay of our mothers. Our fathers sent us out sailing early in the spring, long before the warm water made capsizing remotely safe. Sailing became more than a hobby, it was a way of life for both of us. So, when breakfast was over, we headed down to the shore to check out the yards. The sailing crowd can be a great bunch of people, and soon we found ourselves crewing for an elderly couple planning a day out on the water. They actually offered us dinner when we got back, but we didn't want it. We treated them to the best lunch our ragtag outfits could afford. Piers served the same dinner as fancy restaurants, but for less and with a better view. It was a great day. Back at mine that night, we cracked open a few beers, sat on the plastic chairs I kept behind the garage, and talked. We talked about the day gone by, the work we both did, and Claire. We talked about homecomings and departures, about all the friends I'd left behind. We talked about everything except one thing, the thing that had left me isolated. Finally, it was time for Jim to return to his hotel room. Sleep would give him a chance to slip away in the morning before suburban traffic clogged the roads. In a quiet, almost apologetic voice, he said, "She's dying without you, Henry. She'll live, but she didn't need me before. She certainly doesn't need me now. She needs you, and the guilt is killing her. She cries herself to sleep at night. She doesn't go anywhere. I swear she doesn't see anyone. Claire comes and sits with her, and all she talks about is you and cries. She knows she messed up, Henry. She doesn't justify what she did." Did she ever explain why she did it? No. She goes to a therapist, but she's no closer to an answer now than she was before. Tell her to get a new therapist. She needs you, Henry. Your embrace, not some stranger with books and theories. She had me, but that wasn't enough. Just talk to her, Henry. You don't have to take her back. Just say you forgive her. Say you don't hate her at least. She needs that much. I don't know if I ever hated her. I was angry and hurt beyond anything I thought possible. I never believed she could do this to me. When she did, everything died. I don't hate her, and I don't love her. I just miss the woman I married. But that woman is dead, if she ever existed at all. She existed, Henry, and she still does. I can't explain why she did it, and I don't know what I would do if I were in your shoes. I just know she's burning from within, and you're the only one who can fix it. And who will fix me, Jim? How do I feel whole again? Maybe you can fix each other. Isn't it worth a try? At least it's been a year. Are you happier than when you left? What do you have to lose? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. I think about her, and I wonder, what if she does it again? What happens if I let her back in, trust her again, and she betrays me again? It'll be a longer fall this time. Where will I be if I fall again? You won't, Henry. She'll never make that mistake again. How do you know? When she can't even explain why she did it the first time. And was it really the first time? Have you ever found out who this guy was? Yes. She told Claire he was just a guy she worked with. By then, it was dark, but even in darkness, Jim could feel my eyes drilling into him. He doesn't work there anymore. I need to tell you, Henry. She went to his wife and told her everything. She begged for forgiveness and got slapped for her troubles. That guy went through a messy divorce and left town. He's gone. That doesn't matter, Jim. Half the world is men, and there's always another one waiting for his chance. No one else has a chance, Henry. She's a lonely woman, and her man lives in Providence. Pick up the phone, and she'll answer. Say the word, and she'll move. She'll live here in this house or move into an apartment with you, or anything. Trust me, Henry. She's repentant, and she's got her head screwed on straight now. All you need to do is pick up the phone and call her. I'll think about it. Jim hung his head, feeling like he had failed. We folded the chairs, put the empty cans in the bin, and said our goodbyes. Over the past year, almost all friends and relatives had gone to Providence to discuss the same thing. My sister was the first, and she failed spectacularly. She came through the door, hands on her hips, berating me for running away like a child. Soon enough, she found herself outside, knocking on the same door again but getting no response from inside. When I finally opened the door, she apologized, begging for forgiveness and patience. Her visit was short and unsuccessful, so she warned the others what to expect. Each of them applied their own approach. Jim was the only one patient enough with the history to find the necessary time. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, and as my thoughts returned to the past year, I reached out and turned off the only light bulb illuminating the room. I asked myself the same question Jim did. Was I happier now than when I left? I had to admit that I wasn't. It concerned me no more than the day I left town. I remembered the day I stood at the altar and unconditionally made those vows, until death do us part. And I thought then, why stop? It's for eternity. But that didn't last long. It all happened so quickly and unexpectedly. There were no signs that my wife was cheating because she wasn't. She had always been a faithful and loving spouse, reassuring me when I needed support and gently nudging me when I needed a loving push. Supposedly, I was an adult, but I retained some of those harmful youth habits. Some of those old buttons were still wired into me, and when they were pushed, it was bad. I knew I could get hurt quickly. She provided most of her patience and support for me. However, any sense of betrayal from a friend or colleague would bring destruction. It was an old issue stemming from a lack of security that had haunted me all my life. When she deceived, it was this old reflex that poured gasoline onto the fire of her betrayal. It was the same response that kept me away from her for years, refusing to speak with her, rejecting any plea for forgiveness. I simply destroyed our marriage to its core and walked away. It happened when she was out of town for work. She didn't travel often, but it usually meant she was auditing finances and contract compliance. Most of the week, she traveled as part of a team checking books while others inspected production and test results. This particular trip was lengthy, involving scrutiny of many subcontractors. In the evenings, the team went out to dine and unwind. It was the second night at the site. She danced recklessly and drank too much. It was a poor decision, and in the morning, she expressed deep regret. Her friends advised her to keep it to herself and never tell me, warning her that nothing good would come of it. And she reluctantly agreed. This guy kept trying to repeat it until she threatened to report him. They overheard. She had no idea she had an enemy at work, but this person overheard the argument, sealing her fate. A week later, when the same colleague felt neglected, I received an anonymous email. When I confronted her, my wife confessed. It was only once, and people make mistakes. But it shook my marriage. I packed very few of my things and left without warning, leaving my wife devastated behind me. Since then, I've relived that day 100 times, and here I am, reliving it again. It all feels so fresh in my memory again. I wondered, am I happier than when I left? I lived in isolation, devoid of social life and anyone to share my life with. Neither of us ever filed for divorce, and I never understood why. When I left, I naturally assumed she would file for divorce, which she wanted. The overwhelming agony and sense of worthlessness from a year ago gave way to a malaise that never left me. There was no one to make me smile, no one to laugh at my jokes, and no one to hold at night. Am I even slightly happier than when I left? I sat in the darkness, pondering my life. Then, I slowly got up and hesitantly reached for the phone. I know, everyone wants the story to continue. People hate endings that just hang like this. I don't know what he'll do. Will he call Jim and talk to her? Or will he call his wife? I don't know if he'll confront his demons and succeed if he tries, or if he'll fail. Maybe he'll just stop and say no. Let me tell you this, anger and pain are easy to write, but forgiveness is hard.